Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's NetSuite webcast demo of new features in SuiteAnalytics Workbook. My name is Kaylin Hensley, Marketing Coordinator with GSI. I'm very pleased to welcome our main presenter, Jimmy Morales. Jimmy is a NetSuite consultant here at GSI and holds a BA in Organizational Management. He has a background in web development and working with various ERP systems and has experience in finance and accounting, CRM, professional services automation, and reporting and workflow configuration and customization. Jimmy is a regular presenter on our webinars as well as at industry conferences like SuiteWorld. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give you a chance to review our safe harbor statement. Now for a quick overview of today's meeting, which will last about 60 minutes. First, I will take a moment to go over a couple housekeeping items, as well as provide brief company overview. Then I will turn it over to Jimmy to get into our main presentation that will last about 40 minutes. Next, I will discuss upcoming educational events, and then we will wrap up with a 10-minute Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the question panel at the bottom of the GoToWebinar console window, located on the right of your screen. Please note that questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, so if you would like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation, just click the right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. Clicking the left arrow key will return the console so that you can input questions. And now I would like to give you a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a full-service NetSuite consulting organization. We're an Oracle Platinum partner that was founded in 2004 and now has over 100 employees. We have offices nationwide and are recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in the U.S. GSI specializes in project consulting, managed services, and other services, with all of our services backed with a 100% guarantee. GSI also provides a broad spectrum of business, functional, and technical consulting services for Oracle JD Edwards, Oracle Cloud, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other enterprise applications. We also offer an extensive array of cloud hosting solutions for Oracle Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and JDE Cloud 9. Now I would like to turn things over to Jimmy for our main presentation and demo.
Thanks, Kaylin. And as soon as I get presenter, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I've got a little bit to cover today with the new release. This is very exciting. A lot of content that I really enjoy so far. Let me know if you can see my screen. Should just say demo agenda.
Yes, you're good.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Jimmy Morales. I'm one of the NetSuite consultants here at GSI. And today I have the privilege of showing you the SuiteAnalytics Workbook, which is scheduled to be released 2018.2 in beta. It is still accessible today as Next-Gen Analytics. So I'll show you how you can access it today in advance and of course test it out in the release preview environment as well. So today we're going to look at what SuiteAnalytics Workbook is, how to activate it of course. We're going to do some comparing and contrasting with the standard reporting that comes from NetSuite, showing you what the differences are, some major advantages of using the new SuiteAnalytics Workbook. We'll of course cover a couple disadvantages where you can kind of report that kind of information back up to Oracle and hopefully seek improvements there. And then of course we're going to go into the demo and I'll show you how to create your first report. So with that, one disclaimer that I need to make sure everybody is aware of, SuiteAnalytics Workbook is a beta feature. So this, direct quote from Oracle, its features are preliminary and may be changed or discontinued without prior notice. That is kind of a formal disclaimer that comes from Oracle's NetSuite team from how much work I've seen them put into it and how exhaustive a lot of the content is on it. I don't see it going away anytime soon, which is why I think it's great that we have this number of attendees on where you can go back, play with the feature a little bit, give feedback to them, and I think as long as people know that it's being used and the positive feedback that we give as well, it's going to continue to be supported. So that's what I anticipate, but it is still in beta. So to get started, what is SuiteAnalytics Workbook? It is a supplement for now and possibly a replacement for the reporting functionality out of NetSuite. So it's improved reporting. It offers more consistent fields as they get populated in the report structure. And so what that means is in the past, we've seen inconsistency with the level of fields that get populated for records, related records, sublists, and subrecords. So because of that, the SuiteAnalytics Workbook is an answer to that plea. It offers a cleaner interface, a much cleaner interface, in my opinion, for the users to navigate through with little understanding, I suppose, of how NetSuite is typically navigated. It offers record linkage, so when you connect from one record type to another, it's a little bit more intuitive in how it connects from one record to another, rather than having to find out where fields get tied into the master record than what you may have seen in the past. It also offers pivot tables and graphs. I didn't list graphs in the bullet point here only because if you decide to play with it today in Next Gen Analytics, you won't see the graphing feature, but you will see the pivot table feature. But in the release preview, it is anticipated to offer graph features. So how do we activate it? Well, we've got a screenshot of just the general setup here, but you just go to Setup, Company, Enable Features. You head over to the Analytics subtab, and you'll go to SuiteAnalytics Workbook and make sure that that's checked. So I'll show you how to do that, of course, before we get started. But let's go over some differences between the SuiteAnalytics Workbook versus the standard reporting functionality. In SuiteAnalytics Workbook, again, higher consistency with the field exposure. So finding what fields you're looking for to show on a report, much, much easier. This has been kind of a tremendous level of feedback from end users. So I think they're going to improve on that as well. Very user-friendly interface, of course, and you'll see that in action today. It requires less knowledge of the NetSuite table schema because it actually limits the view based on what the table structure is able to show. You can see immediate results, which also helps with the knowledge on the table schema because you can see what fields you can access immediately. And of course, the instant results is even better because as soon as you create a report, you can start seeing data get populated. So as you go through these workbooks, it's sort of like working with a direct SQL interface where you're getting all of the information right at the click of a button. In standard reporting, of course, the advantage of that is that it's still fully supported. There's no indication that it's getting deprecated anytime soon. So as it stands today, the reporting being fully supported is still your go-to for any especially financial reporting. It does obviously have the familiar record structure and interface. It's very familiar with how you navigate the system. So it's going to be a little bit of a transition switching from standard reporting to SuiteAnalytics, but I think the interface is that much better to where it won't be a problem. And then there is report scheduling as it is today with standard reporting, where you can schedule regular reports to be sent out on a regular basis to a subset of team members. So it is a huge advantage of standard reporting, which is an area where I think we all can kind of band together and give that feedback to Oracle to where they might be able to support this report scheduling. So let's talk about the advantages of SuiteAnalytics Workbook. I really like to sum it up in the three. You're going to see some more or less depending on how you interpret what our demo covers today. But the first is the unified metadata layer. It ensures the fields are consistently exposed in SuiteAnalytics. That metadata will translate all of the information on the record to that clean user interface to where you can see exactly what you're going to get, and you're going to get exactly what you're going to see. It provides consistent results across the workbook, meaning as you navigate through the workbook and you make some changes, it's a little easier to see the data and verify that that data is correct on what you're looking for. The multi-level join, this is one of my personal favorites of the new features of SuiteAnalytics. The fields are accessible across multiple record types, including custom records, meaning you can link record types together and you can find subset data. So for example, if I am pulling an employee information and I want to find that employee's supervisor, well, I can link it to the employee record and look up his supervisor. And then from there, I can find his or her supervisor's supervisor, which is actually what we're going to cover in the demo today. So you can link multiple records multiple times, and you can actually drill down in your data to get all of the information. Pivot and chart functionality, again, that's something that we're going to actually start with in terms of what the end output is going to be. And it's a very clean and easy way to start generating pivot tables and charts. If you're familiar with Excel, it's a lot like Excel. It still offers that Excel export functionality, so you can still use both, but this is a good way to get that snapshot data right after generating the report. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the demo here. I'm going to pull up an existing workbook that I've created called Departmental Utilization. Now with departmental utilization, what we're looking at is are all the hours input for all employees, and we're categorically displaying it by department. We can do it by their supervisor, we can do it by their the date. Of course we can slice and dice this data how we want, but this is kind of the end result of a fully used workbook using the new SuiteAnalytics feature. So what we're looking at as far as the data, and again, I'll get into how we got here, is all of the departments and the grand total number of hours per column. And it's split into two quarters, Q2 and Q3 of 2018. So pretty simple and straightforward, right? So how did we get here? Well, the SuiteAnalytics is going to jump right into what you're looking at here: criteria, data, pivot charts, pivot tables and charts. And you can add a number of pivot tables and charts. You select the data that you wish, you define the criteria, very similar to creating a saved search, and then it will populate all of that information onto a report that looks like this. So I'm going to head over straight to the data tab. And you can see all of the columns that we have available. I have all the dates. I have some criteria that's listed up here on the top. And I chunk out that data by looking at the department, the employee, the manager, the manager's manager, what their note is for the work that was done, the length of the note, so that I can determine if I have employees that are writing particularly long notes with their time sheets, the duration of their time entry, and whether or not it's non-billable. So I'm actually going to jump right in and create this again from scratch so that you can see it today, and you can kind of follow along the steps as you start to note what these are on your own environment after activating SuiteAnalytics. So to get started, we're going to head over to Setup. We're going to go to Company. We're going to go to Enable Features. From here, we're going to head over to the Analytics subtab, and we're going to drop down to SuiteAnalytics Workbook and make sure that this checkbox is checked. Now, if you're not in the release preview, and you just note that when you see it up here, it's kind of easy to miss. Sometimes people find themselves doing lots of work in release preview. If you're not there, this will actually be called Next Gen Analytics. It's still in the same location, and it provides the same functionality, less the graphing functionality, and it gives you the same results. The major difference is when you're in today's environment, so before the release comes out in the next couple of months for you, it won't be located in the Analytics tab. It actually doesn't create this tab for you. You'll have to find it over in Reports, and then just above New, I think it's New Search, somewhere in this area, it'll say Next Gen Analytics, and then you can create a new report from there. But if you're working in the release preview, and this is all in anticipation of that new release, you're going to head over to Analytics, and from here you can create a new workbook by just clicking New Workbook. They don't have any standard workbooks available today, less one called Sales by Analytical Application. I think this is just kind of a demonstration. It's not particularly exciting, so I'm not going to be using that as an example today. But from here, we can actually just go straight to New Workbook. From here, you can see, you can select the different record types that allow you to create reports off of, very similar to the Save Search functionality. If I wish, I can actually just start typing in the search here, and I can choose a record type. So I'm going to pick time tracking. And then we're back to what you saw a minute ago. Now, by default, it pulls kind of the standard information of what the time tracking is looking for. So this is just pulling the duration of the time tracking, and it's pulling the hierarchical information, the date and the employee. So I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and click this little 3-button menu here, and I'm going to drop over to Remove Column. And I've got a clean slate where I can start pulling data in. So this is a little bit familiar to the old reporting style, where I can actually choose what fields I want. But the nice part is this is showing me all of the header level and basically the detail level of the immediate record in question. So I'm looking at just time tracking. I might want to pull some additional information, but let's get started with this one for now. The search functionality, again, instant results. So as soon as I hit date, it's going to start populating everywhere where the date feature, the word date appears. So I'm going to drag this over and drop it in as my first column, and it's going to list every result. So I've got 89,000 time entries over the past year with date populated. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and look at employee. So I can drop that in, drag it over. Maybe I want the employee's supervisor. So it's not there in the time tracking record. Why not? Well, every time someone enters timesheets, do they capture their supervisor? Well, no. So that's where the linkage comes in. So for now, I can actually link by clicking this little link icon here, and it'll let me join the record. So it's going to look at every field that falls in the time tracking record and let me pull up related fields. So maybe I actually just want to pull the employee field. And I can look at the employee or the entity level. I'm going to just look at the employee record. And now I've got a new record type that I can start pulling data on. So everywhere where this person appears, it's going to look at their record and pull additional information. So I can now type in supervisor, and there it is. If I want to unlink this record, I just click this little broken link icon, but I want that supervisor. And let's say, because my organization calls it differently, we'll just call it manager. So I just hit rename on the menu button here. You can resize columns just by clicking whenever your mouse changes to this little resize icon. And let's say I actually want to pull that supervisor's record. So I want to pull their record, and I want to know their supervisor as well. I can actually link the employee record again and create another level, and I can pull their supervisor. And then from that supervisor, I can drag the same field. And it actually nests it for you, so it'll actually tell you how far you're actually going into the record rabbit hole. But let's rename it so that we don't get ourselves confused. And so now I almost have some hierarchical information in terms of the department structure. I've got the employee, their manager, and their manager's manager already. So I need some more time tracking information. So maybe I want to know the employee's department. I'm going to insert over here so I don't get confused and think that it's the manager's department. You can show the hierarchical department structure if it's department by department, but let's just show the child level only because it's just a report for demonstration purposes. And we've got our first department here. I also want to know how much, well, I'm going to pull the memo. I'm going to pull the duration over here on the left-hand side. Just drag and drop each one over one at a time. And we integrate with OpenAir. So let's say I want to look at anything that's non-billable in another system. So I'll just populate that there. So now I've dragged over quite a few different fields that show me the level of data that I want. But of course, I'm getting into potential analysis paralysis here because I've got so much data. So I'm going to have to start creating some criteria to start sorting through this. One extra feature before we get into the criteria. In the data tab, you can actually now do formula fields. These formula fields are using SQL statements. So I'm not going to get too advanced into this to drop off anybody's focus on this. But let's say I just want to look at the number of characters that they're putting into their memo field, as you saw. So I'm going to do memo length. I'm just going to give it a name up here in the formula field name. And I can choose the type of output I'm putting. This is just an integer or just a number. And I've got my recently used functions here. So all I do is double click this. If I click it once, it'll give me an example of what I'm looking for and how to use it. I'll double click it and it'll actually pre-populate the formula for me. So from here I know based on the example I want to replace the CHAR with what field I want to start counting the number of characters. The nice part about when I click here on fields on the sub tab, as I scroll down you can see I've got my data grid and then I've got all the fields that appear in time tracking. So I've got all joined records in the data grid, I've got data grid, time tracking, employee, and supervisor fields to choose from. If I choose data grid, it'll actually only show me everything that I have on these columns, which is pretty cool for getting yourself organized. So I'm going to be looking at the memo field. So I'll just delete this and I'll double click the word memo and it'll insert it for me. So I got my first formula. You can actually hit validate over here on the right hand side and it'll give you a green check mark if it's good and it'll highlight it red and say if the syntax is not valid. As soon as I hit apply, it gives me a formula fields to choose from over here and start dragging them over. So I can actually drag this over to the memo column. And now I've got the number of characters that exist in the memo field. So again, I know which of my employees are writing novels. So we're going to head back over to the criteria column because we don't want a grand total of 89,000 results. So we'll start to filter through our data. Over here, you've got the same functionality as we have in our data column or our data tab. So from here, we can start dragging fields over into the conditional criteria pane. The way this works is a little different than the formula expressions that you may be familiar with in NetSuite today. They actually have groupings now. And the nice part about groupings is you can do sets of conditions, and each set of conditions can be given an and or an or statement. So you can say, I want this and this and this, and this or this or this. So we're going to do something like that. So we're going to head over to new group. As soon as I click new group, this is my first grouping. And I can create a separate group, and that's my second grouping. And this is my and statement. So maybe I want this to be an or, and you can see it start to populate the parentheses right around these different groupings. So let's say I want to look at the employee field first, and I want a particular employee type. Say I want 1099 employees. And I want it to be a 1099 if it is a 1099, I want it to also be a particular department. So I'll just drop it right down underneath. I'm moving kind of fast here. So what I did was I dragged this over, and you can see this little gray bar appear underneath where I want it to be. I can drag it anywhere on these groups, and I can even drag it right on a new group tab, and it'll create a new group. So I'll just drag it right underneath this one, so it'll group it with that. From here, let's say I want it to be just one single group by department. And I'll click the department, and I'll click this little arrow here, and it'll drag it over to whichever one I want. I can actually drag and click if I want multiple groups, or I can single click and unclick them and choose them one at a time. So as soon as I hit OK, it now created another grouping, and this is an OR statement. So let's say I want this to be an AND. So the first version is I only want to populate data if the employee is a 1099 contractor, but if they are, I want them to also only be tier 1. Maybe I want them to be not tier 1, so I'll do none of when I drag the drop, which is right over here. I can click this drop down and choose any of or none of, and now I want none of tier 1. So I'll just click here, click the little arrow, and then click OK. And then I'll take the employee type, so I'll just minimize this, I'll collapse this little record type here, and I'll go into the employee record type and expand that. And I'll drag this over, and I want this to be false. So I'll hit no, then I'll hit OK. This is an OR by default, so I'll just switch it over to AND by clicking the word. So now it's got to be both a 1099 and tier 1, or if it's not, 1099 is not true, and it's not tier 1. Maybe I want an additional AND because I'm still pulling a lot of date information. So I'm going to drop date in here. Now, if I wanted to save time, I might want to create a different group, shift both of these in, and create a separate group where that's an and then this is the OR. But since I've already built these out, I'm just going to drop it into both one at a time. So I'll take the date, and I'll say I can actually choose whether I want it to be a specific date range, relative dates, date ranges, and values. Relative dates mean according to today, or relative to different periods. Or I can do a date range, which this is kind of familiar to you that are familiar with NetSuite as it is today. Or I can choose, by quarter. I'll do last fiscal quarter to date, right? And I'll hit OK. So that's my AND. Now, when you have three-pronged groups, these ANDs are actually together. So if I change this to OR, it'll make them both OR. So just an FYI when you're creating your own groupings, so you don't get stuck. We'll duplicate this one. So by the way, if you want, you can actually move this over here. Let's say I put it in the wrong one. I can actually just drag it over. So this drag and drop functionality is really cool. But I'm going to take date again. I'm just going to repopulate that one. So I'll go to date ranges, quarter, and I'll go to last fiscal quarter to date. I'll hit OK. There. So now I've got a pretty hefty criteria that limits the data that I have today. So if I head back over to my data tab, again, instant results, much less data, so I don't run into getting a little bit too much information there. So now we can actually create our first pivot table. So if I head over to this tab, it automatically creates a new tab called Pivot 1 with some new functionality. Again, this is very similar to the Excel functionality that we talked about. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our rows, our columns, and our values. We know our values are going to be duration, so I'll just drag this over to the Values tab, or pane, and then I'll drop the employee over to the rows. Maybe I want date. Now here's another really cool feature, something that you're going to notice. When I drop this in, instead of dropping it automatically by date, it'll actually nest it and start doing roll-up values. So I can click the little plus sign here, and it'll expand that roll-up value to instead be by date and then by quarter. So as soon as I do that, now I have my rows, my columns, my dates. Maybe I even want an additional filter to appear on just this pivot table. So I'm going to go into my department tab, and I'm going to drag it over here into this filter pane, drag and drop field to add it as a filter. And maybe I want a particular department. This time I'll do tier 2 instead of tier 1. Just unclick those, click this one, and I'll click the little right arrow, and then I'll click OK. And now I've got my first filter. And it'll start categorically adding them. If you get more than, I think, 5, it'll just say you've got 5 filters. So hit the little refresh button over here on the right-hand side, and it'll generate my first pivot table. So because I've only got 2 results, you can see it's a pretty small table, but you can see the way it starts to sum the data by quarter. So it'll take all of my employees and start adding all of that up. If I want, I can create sums. So maybe I want to sum all employees. This little icon over here will allow me to place a summation on the top or bottom of each row, or do it by row. So maybe I want it by employee, or maybe I add another row like supervisor. So I'll just go straight to the top, and I'll also do one to the right of the column so I can see how many they have for both quarters. So I'll hit OK here. And this one you actually have to refresh because it is a pivot table, but still populates the data quite a bit faster. So now I've got my grand total for all employees by the quarter, and I've got total for each individual employee on the right-hand pane. These icons over here on the top left will allow me to turn on and off what kind of row highlighting. So let's say I hover my mouse over here, you can see it highlights the row, but maybe I want it to highlight the whole column so I know where I am down here, right? So I can hit this button here, enable active column highlighting. I can do it freeze row headers, which will, as soon as I refresh here and I scroll down, it'll, or excuse me here, let me pin all of these. And it'll pin the row header up here so I can pan up and down without having to lose my place. So now I've got some good data to work with, right? Maybe I want to put this onto a clean chart. So I head over to the chart tab, and it adds a new chart where I can drag and drop the information very similarly to Excel. So on my X axis, I just want date, right? But my series, and I'm going to do it by quarter, but my series, I want it to be by department. So that's what the chart was showing earlier when I was demonstrating this. And the measurements, again, are the duration. So I want the summation of all hours entered by employee for this. So now I've got my chart. Again, drag and drop, very easy functionality. Just hit the little refresh button here. And now I've got my departments by quarter. As you can see in Q1, we didn't have any activity based on the filters that we set, but in Q2, I've got quite a bit of data. And if I hover over any one of these columns, it'll tell me based on the legend of the number of results. So development delivery, I've got 2,832.25. If I head over to my pivot table, and I drop department in by above employee, and I refresh, I can kind of validate that data, which is pretty cool. You can actually collapse information as soon as it becomes roll-up nested. So I know that these employees categorically fall into this particular department. So I can minimize this, and I can see the grand total number of hours by department by employee. If I move this, it'll tell me the the department as it pertains to the employee instead. So it'll just vice versa it. So, and now this is obviously giving me different results than my chart, because this pivot table has a filter set of department any of tier 2. So this is, I can hit this little trash icon and it'll remove that. And now I can drop my department back up on top and I'll hit refresh. And now I can start to minimize these. So there's my 12 hours by no department for Q1. And let's validate our tier 2. So I can just minimize these one at a time. So there's my tier 2. And there's my 530, 53, 40, 75. So we'll head back over here to Q2. And 53, 40, 75. So I was able to validate that chart information. I can also modify the chart by hitting the options tab here. I can give it a chart title. So we'll call it departmental utilization. Maybe I'll say total hours by department last quarter to date. Give the title some information, so I can do the quarter, and this is hours. I'll just hit refresh, and this pulls all of that information here. So from there, I can minimize this information and really get a cleaner output of the chart. I can print the chart by clicking this little print icon, and all it does is just, it's basically hitting Control P on that particular chart with just the graphic. But I can also hit this little export button, and it'll export it to an SVG file, where I can actually embed it into other documents. The data I can also export into a CSV file. So from there, if I want, I can slice and dice my data even further using Excel, and it just downloads it accordingly. Finally, we can head over to this little menu icon, and I can save the information that I want on this workbook, or I can share it to a specific set of users. So first I have to save it. So I'm going to give it some information. I can click this little I here, and I can finally give it a name. So we'll call it departmental utilization. And again, maybe I'll do the same information for my chart. Total hours by department last quarter to date. So I'll hit apply, apply. That gives the workbook a name and all that. I'll hit save. And then I just give it a name, same thing, it just pre-populates that information. I hit apply, and then it saves it. From there, I'll hit the little 3-line menu button here, and I'll hit share workbook, and I can share it to different roles or different employees. Maybe I'll share it with everybody, and I can just do add all. And I'll hit save and share. And then now everybody has access to my new workbook. So that about sums up everything that we're covering today. It's a very, I know it's a pretty heavy coverage of this new feature, but I'm going to hand it back to Kaylin, who will have some follow-up and maybe some opportunities for some Q&A for everybody. So thank you all very much, and I'm going to hand it back over.
Thanks, Jimmy. Now I would like to cover a few follow-up items and then move to our question and answer section of our webcast. Our webcast today is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on NetSuite. Our upcoming webcasts are listed on the screen. To access these webcasts, visit getgsi.com/NetSuite webcasts. GSI provides extensive free educational resources for the NetSuite community, including our weekly educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, Online Resource Center, where you can access hundreds of recorded on-demand webcasts, white papers, etc., and on-site and virtual workshops. If you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or create an account to access our Resource Center, go to getgsi.com. Go to Platforms on the main menu, and then select NetSuite, and then select the appropriate link on the left. While I see that we have already had several questions submitted online, I would like to remind everyone that if you would still like to submit a question, you can do so using the questions panel in the GoToWebinar console window on the right of your screen. If you minimized your console earlier, please click the left arrow to redisplay the questions panel. All right, our first question comes from Jane. Since the feature is in beta, if we like it, how can we let Oracle know if we want it to be fully supported?
It's a good question. So at the top right now, and I'm seeing this actually across the new release preview. I'm not sure if the feedback functionality is only in release preview setting, but it certainly exists in the beta functionality of analytics. But on the top right-hand side of next to your name, there's always the feedback button where you can click that and then give it asks you to plug in an emoji like a frowny face on a scale of frowny face to smiley face on how you feel about a particular aspect of the system. And then from there, you can give direct feedback. But there is another blue button for give feedback on the top right-hand side of the analytics pane. And it's always there. It's a big blue button. You can't miss it. It says give feedback. And it's the same thing, frowny face to smiley face. And then you choose which function you want to give feedback on. I highly recommend giving the smiley face feedback on everything that you like, not just the few things, but everything that you do like, so that it does encourage NetSuite to continue supporting this functionality and building it out, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be much work for them to add features to it as it stands today. And of course, give the negative feedback where necessary. One of the disadvantages I was going to talk about was that right now you can't schedule it, and that was an advantage to the standard reporting. And it may be based on one of the questions I'm seeing pop up here that I don't actually have the answer to immediately. We'll get to it, but give the negative feedback where necessary so that they can provide response there. So hopefully that answers that question.
All right. Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Jimmy. Our next question comes from John, and it says, what does it look like when it's printed?
So when it's printed, what I was able to show was the chart when it's printed. There's actually no print functionality as it is today with the data. So that's another area where you're going to want to put a nice little frowny face on the give feedback. However, you still can export it to the CSV, drop it right into an Excel, and create your own pivot table as easily as just clicking create pivot table. You don't even have to do anything from there. And it's very similar to what you saw there. And that makes it a little bit easier for graphical interface for printing. But yeah, there's actually no print functionality for the data as it is right now. But you still can print it from the charts, is what you saw.
All right. Thanks, John, and thanks, Jimmy. Our next question comes from Andy, and it says, do roles require modification to grant access to the new features?
That's not something that I've seen so far. Anyone who has just hit the enable feature, their team sees it. I've only seen it in 3 different environments, so I couldn't tell you if that's going to be the case for everybody. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. Oh, it looks like Andy had left, but I'll email out the answer to that one. if I can find out whether or not roles require that. I don't think that they do.
All right. Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Jimmy. Our next question comes from Jeff, and it says, does the interface provide access to the budget data? And it said that I didn't see a reference to a budget table in the 2018.1 versions list of records types.
So that's a great question. From what you saw immediately upon me hitting new workbook was the large list of different table types or record types that you can pull from. I too did not see budget on there. I did see account, and I'm not sure if there's a workaround using the account linkage that I talked about where you click the little link icon. But in just playing with that, because I actually tinkered with it when I saw your question pop up, and I did not see it appear on the linkage for the account. So it may be something where because you don't see it in that reference, and that it's not there. And I did see that kind of thing in just navigating the system as well. I would say, hey, it's not doing this, and then I go and reference the documents, and I just see that it's not even listed there. So it's probably safe to assume that because it's not listed there, it's not supported. So one area of feedback where you can give it to them. But if I find a way to do that, I will try and keep your information. I can follow up with you if I find that.
All right, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Jimmy. Okay, that appears to be the end of the questions. Thank you, Jimmy, and everyone for your questions today. As a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit. You will be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website, where you can access the recording from today's webcast, as well as a copy of the presentation. After today's webcast, we will do a drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card. Anyone who attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact Jimmy or I, and we will get back to you. Our contact information is on the bottom of the screen. Thanks again for attending our presentation, and have a great day.